B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins News and Comment. It's Wednesday, July 8th, 2020. The Supreme Court has delivered another body blow to the principle of separation of church and state in twin decisions announced today. And this has been brewing for a long time. It's a trend. The Supreme Court is tilting more and more in favor of religious interests at the expense of secular people and rational thinking. The first case decided by a 7-2 vote today, with only RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Sonia Sotomayor dissenting, would deny as many as 125,000 women who work for religious-related entities. Think a Catholic hospital. And those women will lose contraceptive coverage from their employer-paid health insurance because of what I consider to be a corrupt bargain between the Catholic bishops and the Trump administration. And what the bishops do is they use the Little Sisters of the Poor, right? The most sympathetic, selfless, religious organization that is part of the Catholic universe in the United States. And they keep filing lawsuits saying that it is an undue burden for them in any way to be connected with contraceptive devices and services delivered to people who work for them. And not all those people are Catholic or deeply religious, and they certainly aren't little sisters of the poor. And while you can rationalize that a religious organization wants to maintain its moral purity in every act it takes, this then opens the door for corporate entities like Hobby Lobby, whose majority owners and management are evangelical Christians. They don't believe in abortion or contraception. And they are able to deny their employees access to those services under the same, how can I put it? It's a principle that is stretched to the point of absurdity. And to see Elena Kagan and Justice Stephen Breyer join the mostly Catholic majority in promoting these ideas is really disturbing. And it carves out special status for people who claim that God tells them what to do, that this is some sort of divine intervention. And the history of the case is that it originated with Hobby Lobby. Then religious groups said that the accommodation that was worked out by the Obama administration, and under Obamacare, contraceptive services are required to be provided at no charge, and they basically used gimmicks to have the government and insurance companies pick up the tab so that the Little Sisters of the Poor could claim that their hands were clean. And, to see these white Catholic males, joined by the Jewish Justice Elena Kagan, carving out special status for these religious claims, I think stretches the First Amendment freedom of religion, and it really destroys any idea of freedom from religion. And likewise, in a separate case related to employment discrimination, if you're on the God Squad, you can fire people for reasons and in a manner that no other employer would be able to do. You just claim a ministerial exception. And so, a woman, I believe from Michigan, who had filed a lawsuit because her contract wasn't renewed because she had a disability. She also had cancer. And the religious organization that she worked for was able to fire her without further liability. And teachers in California Catholic schools who sued their employers for job discrimination, well, the Supreme Court said that discrimination is okay if it is done by a religious entity. And they are stretching the definition. For example, there are many teachers in Catholic grade schools and high schools and universities too, who are not necessarily Catholic. But, for example, if they married a member of the same sex, if they openly advocate for contraception or abortion rights, even if they're not teaching a religious class, even if they aren't involved in the religious side of that educational process, this ruling appears to allow a religious employer to define on its own terms who a ministerial person is. And when they do, that individual's rights are second to the inspired religious claims that are made. So I find this very disappointing. I would at least like to see it a closer vote. And as a recovering Catholic myself, it pains me to see these religious extremists, John Roberts, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, Clarence Thomas, and Samuel Alito, put their religious views above the Constitution. Because that's how I interpret the decisions that were released today. And then we have the God Squad and COVID. Because if you remember, Trump back in early May declared that churches are essential, and therefore state governments, local governments could not order them to suspend religious gatherings because of the pandemic. Well, the payback is starting to arrive. Pastors and families have tested positive, as have church ushers, front door greeters, and hundreds of churchgoers. In Texas, 50 people contracted the virus after a pastor told congregants they could again hug each other. In Florida, a teenage girl died last month after attending a youth party at her church. More than 650 coronavirus cases have been linked to nearly 40 churches and religious events across the United States since the beginning of this pandemic. So, you can be essential, but the virus doesn't recognize that. You can believe that you are bathed in the blood of the Lord. I heard one evangelical Christian make that comment to a news reporter a few months ago. Some Christian groups here in California objected to a rule restricting singing in places of worship. In Nevada, the Calvary Chapel, Dayton Valley, is challenging state rules that cap religious gatherings at 50 people, comparing that to casinos and other businesses, saying this is discrimination against religion. So, in rural northeastern Oregon, Union County, there are only 6 recorded cases of COVID when the Lighthouse United Pentecostal Church announced its reopening May 22nd. And they cited Donald Trump as the source of the authority to do that. And that county that had only 6 cases now has 356. Praise the Lord. And pass the virus. This is a really disturbing court ruling, too, coming from the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Atlanta today. As you may know, the last big election in Florida in 2018, voters by a wide margin, 65%, supported an amendment to the state constitution, Amendment 4, which allows former felons to vote. And then, sensing that those former felons will mostly vote for Democrats, the Republicans who control Florida moved in to restrict that by saying, well, yeah, you can vote, but first you have to pay off any outstanding fines or fees. And in my view, that amounts to a poll tax. A lower court had ruled just that. But the real setback for people who have a history with the criminal justice system and won a vote in the Florida primary in August, well, that primary day is the same day when the next hearing will be heard. And in the meantime, tens of thousands of former convicts in Florida who have not yet registered to vote are going to be locked out. And the Washington Post quotes Desmond Meade. He's president of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, an ex-con himself. My heart went out to the countless number of returned citizens who were looking forward to participating in an election, maybe for the first time, or for the first time in a long time. To see their hopes dashed like that because of politics, that really brought me to tears. Meade was able to register in January of 2019, then was told he couldn't vote because he still owed about $1,000 in fines and fees. He was able to pay them, and he will be able to vote in the primary in August in Florida. But many others will not. A new poll from the Guardian and Opinium Research shows that 9 out of 10 Americans believe that racism and police violence are problems. And when you look at that remarkable unity in a nation that is so badly divided, and the divider-in-chief is stoking the other side of this proposition, promoting law and order, all cops are good, all protesters are bad. 91% of Americans agree that racism is a problem. 72% think it's a serious one. 89% think police violence is a problem. 65% consider it serious. The research shows that more Americans disapprove than approve of Trump's response to the protests, 47 to 31%. Democrats at 75 to 12%, independents 55 to 27%. 70% of those who voted for Trump in 2016 back his actions. So this is a racial divide that Trump is openly trying to exploit. And he, for a guy who doesn't like to read reports, I guess people show him graphs and charts of the polling out there because he inhales that. He lives for it. It is part of his narcissistic supply. But only 76% believe that most cops are good and that there are a few bad apples. 13% take the opposite view, that most police officers are bad, but there are a few good ones. And according to the poll, only 1 in 4, about 24%, say they agree with the phrase defund the police, and 58% disagree. Although 1 in 3, 32%, say they approve of redirecting funding for police departments toward education, healthcare, and community social programs. Yesterday, I mentioned, after we talked about our recap of the Seattle protest in the CHOP, previously known as the Chaz, with our correspondent, Jonah Leto, and he had witnessed one of the incidents where a man drove intentionally into a crowd of protesters. Well, today the New York Times puts a number on it. There have been at least 66 car attacks nationwide since George Floyd was killed by Minneapolis police on Memorial Day. 7 of those have been by law enforcement officer, including the 2 in New York that I also mentioned yesterday, who had the opportunity to put it in reverse and not run over anybody, but chose to put it in drive and risk driving over human beings. Out of these 66 car attacks, prosecutors so far have brought charges in only about 24 cases so far. And I also referenced the Charlottesville fatality caused by a car driven by James Fields when he killed Heather Heyer. The article reminds us that at his trial, the evidence showed that he had shared images online of cars ramming into people before he got behind the wheel, I believe it was a Dodge Charger, during the counter-protests that Heather Heyer was part of in Charlottesville. And when I spoke with Jonah Leto, I asked him if there was any more information on the Seattle driver who killed Summer Taylor on Interstate 5. That happened over the long July 4th holiday. The driver's name is Dawit Khalid. He has not been charged yet, but he's being held on bail of over $1 million. And in Seattle, the King County Sheriff's Office has announced that one of their deputies has been placed on leave after posting a picture of a vehicle hitting somebody under the phrase, "All lives splatter." Turns out he is the cousin of Washington State Governor Jay Inslee. Inslee appears to be deeply embarrassed. Marjorie Cohn, who is a retired constitutional law professor from the Thomas Jefferson School in San Diego, and a woman I've enjoyed talking with many times over the years, she recounts the rights of protesters that have been violated, leading to lawsuits against police who have used toxic chemicals, sonic weapons, dangerous projectiles, surveillance, physical violence, and kettling during the protests, mostly during the month of June. And Professor Cohn writes, protesters demonstrating against white supremacy and police brutality have been met with illegal repression by law enforcement, and this is leading to legal action. A study by the University of Chicago Law School's International Human Rights Clinic found not one police department in the 20 largest U.S. cities in compliance with minimum human rights standards governing the use of lethal force. Not one out of the top 20. And they refer to this violence as state-sanctioned violence. Tina Cernko was marching at a Black Lives Matter L.A. rally when police shot her in the rib cage and bicep with what are called kinetic impact projectiles, also known as rubber bullets. And she's now, Cernko, I guess is the pronunciation, is a plaintiff in a class action suit filed in district court by the National Lawyers Guild, Black Lives Matter L.A., and the L.A. Community Action Network. Cernko was hit on her forehead above the eye. She bled profusely, had temporary hearing loss, extreme pain, and 3 weeks after the incident, she still suffered nerve damage. Another plaintiff in that class action suit, a woman named Trujillo, participated in a peaceful protest June 1st. When she tried to leave, she and other protesters were hemmed in. Kettled is the term, surrounded by police to prevent anybody from leaving. And Trujillo says that an officer sprayed an aerosol agent at a woman with a small child who was crying, and that both of them suffered injuries from that spray. So this new report documents 125 incidents of police violence against protesters in 40 states and Washington, D.C., from May 26th to June 5th. With video evidence, The abuses include beatings, misuse of pepper spray, tear gas, inappropriate, indiscriminate firing of rubber bullets and sponge grenades or sponge-tipped bullets. And even when a minority of protesters committed unlawful acts, security forces have routinely used disproportionate and indiscriminate force against entire demonstrations. And that's illegal. Then we have the case of the court orders in Seattle and Denver that the police should stop using chemical weapons, including tear gas. And those orders have been routinely violated. So this is going to have to be another issue that we come to terms with in police reform. And frankly, the Democrats don't seem up to the task. Sure, they'll talk about a registry of bad cops, ending chokeholds, and things that are safe. But really, will they take on the issues of police riots, police instigated violent situations? I'm happy to report that here in California, there is a debate among the leaders of the state Democratic Party, considering a proposal to reject contributions from police unions that have dropped $1.8 million into the Democrats' coffers since 2017 alone. I think that is an excellent idea. Over at The Intercept, Robert Mackey has been watching TV too much, and he's seen a couple of campaign ads from the Trump administration that include deceptively edited and just misleading use of footage from some of the protests that occurred during June. So one of the ads distorts the meaning of video recorded during a protest on May 31st in Washington. The guy who shot the footage works for Turkey's state-owned Anadolu news agency. His name is Savan Alaverdi. So he captured a sequence where black protesters tackled and disarmed a white man who was dressed all in black, who was using a hammer to break up pieces of the sidewalk so that he had concrete chunks to lob at cops. So after they subdued the man, the group of mostly black protesters dragged him to a line of cops and insisted that he be arrested. But 10 days later, the Trump campaign turned that footage into a completely different scene. They used the images of the man hammering the pavement and part of the scuffle after he was tackled to offer voters a glimpse of the chaos in the streets that they suggest Joe Biden would permit if he's elected president. And the ad superimposed video of Biden kneeling at a church in Delaware onto snippets of this footage. It's based on a pair of lies that the protesters who tackled the man were bent on violence and that Biden, who's already said, "I won't support defunding the police," would enable some reign of terror. In the second ad, which offers a vision of the future world in which the police have been abolished and calling 911 only gets you a voicemail, the footage of the man breaking up the pavement and being tackled appears as a caller to the police emergency line. Here's the automated instruction: to report a murder, press 2. So this shows just how cunning and underhanded Trump's campaign team is, led by Brad Parscale. And they will use any footage and just lie about it in order to advance their message points. And here is a really lowball attack, again, not based on facts. And I know a little bit about this because in the unwanted tweets that I'm now getting 2 to 4 times a day from Twitter, recommended for you, video by Donald Trump. Well, one of those videos was a segment of Tucker Carlson's show on Fox News, where Carlson is attacking Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois. Now, she is a mixed-race person. One parent was Thai, the other parent American. She lost both of her legs fighting in the Iraq War. And I don't know Tammy Duckworth and her politics in great detail, but from a distance I respect her. And I don't know anything untoward about her. But because she gave an interview where she said it's worth discussing removing monuments of George Washington, the first the first president and a slave owner, that Carlson labeled her and lumped her together with Ilhan Omar from Minnesota as vandals who hate the United States because they have called attention to its historical racism and inequities. Quote from Carlson, "There are many of us here who do like this country. We have to fight to preserve our nation and heritage. We live here," as if Tammy Duckworth and Ilhan Omar don't. "We don't want to destroy it. We have every right to fight and preserve our nation and our heritage and our culture." And he continued, "And when vandals like Tammy Duckworth and Ilhan Omar tell us that we're not allowed to question their patriotism, even as they scream about how horrible America is, we have every right to laugh in their faces, and we should." Now, this is so ugly and just false in so many ways. As I have said before, every protester who risked getting the coronavirus in order to take to the streets and express themselves did it because they want this country to be better. And I believe that these are real patriots who offer not some jingoistic, right-wing, phony sense of patriotism, but what I consider to be the real McCoy. Carlson also called Tammy Duckworth a moron, saying that to people like her, George Washington is just some old white guy who needs to be erased. Then he went on, "Let's tear down our statues, rename our capital city Sharpton or Mandela, and let the revolution continue. Tammy Duckworth is not a child, at least not technically. She is a sitting U.S. Senator." Well, she also is a descendant of people who've been in the U.S. military going all the way back to the Revolution. And she tweeted, "My family fought for our nation's independence alongside George Washington. I'm a proud member of the Daughters of the American Revolution." And Tucker Carlson, who really doesn't know where the bottom is, was told by Tammy Duckworth she invited him to walk a mile in my legs. Those are her prosthetic legs. And then tell me whether or not I love America. As you know, we are offering $100 grants to people at this difficult time from the Peter B. Collins Podcast Community Fund. And I'm really touched by the latest applicant. His name is Tao Lin. I'll spell it Taolin. And I encourage you to Google his name. You'll be taken to his website, where, like I did, you can watch video footage of him playing a Steinway piano. He is a world-class musician, and he has been a virtuoso or a prodigy from the age of 4 in Shanghai. And he writes, "Dear Mr. Collins, I listen to your podcasts regularly and enjoy them. My wife and I are both concertizing pianists living in Florida, and due to COVID-19, all of our concert activities have been canceled since March because no concert venue is open, and sadly there is no end in sight. Most of our fall and winter bookings are getting canceled as well, and this certainly has been financially devastating. If it's still possible to get some help from your community fund, we truly appreciate it." Well, Taolin, I'm glad to have you listening. Actually, I have to say that it's humbling. And I enjoyed watching you perform, and I'm very happy to send you $100. I wish I had a lot more to distribute to people in need at this point. And if you're one of those people, don't hesitate. I'm able to offer a few more grants. The funding is running low. But just drop an email to peter@peterbcollins.com. Explain your situation. And if you've been following this, you know that I've only turned down one, which I thought was a silly request of all those that I have received so far. So as you know, Trump goes ballistic about the thought of, the majority of the electorate voting in November by mail. And while I accept that absentee voting is very popular, 70% of people before COVID in the California primary voted by mail, there are issues. And there are the security issues that we saw play out with Republican operatives in North Carolina who were harvesting absentee ballots and only submitting to the registrar the ones who they knew or expected to be for their particular candidates. So now we are getting some data. In May, New Jersey officials rejected almost 10% of mail-in ballots during local elections. In Florida, over 18,500 ballots were rejected during the March primary. In Nevada, 6,700 ballots were rejected because of signature matching issues. In Kentucky's June primary, more than 3,800 ballots were rejected in Jefferson County. Now, this article in The Guardian opens with the plight of a Texan, 64-year-old Rosalie Weisfield. She has been voting faithfully for 40 years. But after she submitted her vote by mail, she got a letter back saying election officials had rejected her ballot. They examined her signature, compared it to the one that they had on file, and said that they weren't a match. And this is an issue I've raised many times. The people who count the ballots are not handwriting experts. They're not graphologists. Also, we sign our names different ways at different times. And I don't remember exactly how I signed my last voter registration form. I sometimes sign with my initials, PB Collins. I sometimes sign Peter Collins. I sometimes sign Peter B. Collins. And sometimes I scribble it, and sometimes I use good penmanship. So this is not a good standard. So you write carefully when you fill out your absentee ballot and sign those envelope flaps. As you know, Facebook is under fire with some 750 advertisers boycotting it right now. And a group of people just released a 100-page report about Facebook and its failure to fight discrimination on the social media platform. They say that the social network, was repeatedly faulted for not having the infrastructure to handle civil rights and for prioritizing free expression on the platform over non-discrimination. In some decisions, Facebook didn't seek civil rights expertise, according to the auditors, potentially setting a terrible precedent that could affect the November election and other free speech issues. So Laura Murphy and Megan, I hope I get this name right, Cacace, C-A-C-A-C-E. They're civil rights experts and lawyers. They're quoted as saying, "Many in the civil rights community have become disheartened, frustrated, and angry after years of engagement, where they implored Facebook to do more to advance equality and fight discrimination. They said they had vigorously advocated for more and would like to see the company go further to address civil rights concerns in a host of areas." So they got a face-to-face meeting, I guess it was face-to-face, maybe Zoom-to-face, with Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg, the top two dogs at Facebook. They presented 10 demands, including appointing a civil rights executive. And The only agreement they came away with was the civil rights executive. The auditors credited Facebook for making progress on some issues, including increasing hire of in-house civil rights experts over the past 2 years. But it was critical of Facebook's handling of speech, particularly speech from politicians and the effects on users. The auditors said Facebook has been too willing to exempt politicians from abiding by its rules, and that's something I agree with, even though I do not support direct censorship. Facebook also announced that it's taken down a network of more than 100 pages and accounts that were controlled by Roger Stone, and they figure he's not going to be able to do much with them from prison, where he is supposed to report in about a week. Facebook officials said that the dirty trickster used fake accounts and other deceptive measures to manipulate public debate, and in a small number of occasions he drew attention to posts made by WikiLeaks. I don't think that's a crime. Anyway, they said that there were 54 accounts, 50 pages, 4 Instagram accounts that were closed today, not because of his political views or his connections to Trump, but for coordinated, inauthentic behavior. Boy, I see a lot of that on Facebook. I don't see them doing anything about it. Now, our daily COVID-19 report, edited by Linda Lewis. We've crossed a grisly threshold here in the United States, now 3 million confirmed cases of COVID-19, with 131,666 deaths. The worldwide count is 11.9 million cases and 545,000 deaths. And new records are being set every day. The U.S. has crossed the daily threshold of 60,000 new cases per day in 28 states, and this is the most meaningful figure. The average positive test rate is over 5%. In Arizona, the average positive test rate is a stunning 25%. Now, these are the real causes for alarm. As we've acknowledged, the rate of hospitalizations, except for a few hotspots, is manageable. The rate of mortality, the deaths, have been unusually low given the high rate of positive testing. But that may not last. And if we continue to see this number of cases, even with the demographic shift to more younger people being found positive, this could go on for a long time. British neurologists have determined that the dangers of COVID-19 include serious brain disorders and develop in some patients with mild symptoms. In a paper published today in the journal Brain, they describe alarming complications that range from brain inflammation and delirium to nerve damage and stroke. Among 40 UK patients, 8 had peripheral nerve problems that are fatal in 5% of cases. And a quote from the author, "We're seeing things in the way COVID-19 affects the brain that we haven't seen before with other viruses." And a note from Linda Lewis, "Another serious impact of the virus so far is unmeasured, as we've noted previously. The demographics of the current surge are different from the first part of the wave. Initially, the proportion of seniors and people with chronic illness was higher. If that at-risk group is isolating now, as some reports suggest, the death rate would go down, but only as long as the at-risk population continues isolating. If younger people refuse to distance or wear masks, a larger percentage of the population will be forced indefinitely into exile from the rest of society or risk death by reconnecting and boosting the death rate." And here is disappointing news, something that's been an open question for a while, and that is, if you get COVID once, do you carry antibodies that essentially make you immune from further infection? Research conducted by the government and leading epidemiologists in Spain found that the antibodies last just a few weeks in some patients. Only 5% of those tested maintained antibodies, according to findings published in The Lancet. You may recall that, it was back in April that Trump was trying to reopen the country by Easter. And at one point, he announced that he alone had the authority, even though he hadn't issued any shutdown orders himself, to decide when states could reopen. Now, after a few days, somebody pounded into that mush brain of his that this was bad for him politically, because his fingerprints would be on the reopening orders that could lead to further calamity. So now Trump has narrowed it, and he has decided that he alone can decide when schools of all levels, from kindergarten all the way through universities, can reopen. And he is injecting politics by suggesting that Democrats want to keep schools closed as part of this extensive effort to use the coronavirus to prevent him from being reelected. And I do think that Trump has a narrow point. For example, Rachel Maddow, for the first time in many weeks, didn't devote her show as much to COVID as she did to the new Kiss and Tell book by Mary Trump, the president's niece. And I've done all the coverage on that I will. It's out there in many venues if you want to read about it. It's somewhat interesting. But Rachel Maddow's primary point on her show every night is to find the story that puts Trump in the most negative light that is available on a particular day. And yesterday, the Trump book trumped, if you will, the coronavirus as the, most effective hit on Trump. But beyond that, I don't see any Democratic leaders. I don't see anybody who is playing politics with school reopenings and with other issues related to lockdowns and measures to protect from the widespread transmission of COVID-19. So Trump has now forced the Center for Disease Control, centers, I guess it is, to withdraw and rewrite their guidelines for school openings. CDC Director Robert Redfield was on the hot seat today, and he squirmed and said, oh, no, our guidelines, we don't want them to be used as a reason why schools don't open. And I don't believe any parents, any educators, or most students want to continue going to classes on Zoom. But we see Trump once again micromanaging, injecting politics, trying to make the Democrats look bad, trying to make himself look good. And that's no easy task these days. Also on the education front, as we reported yesterday, college students who will be attending classes remotely, who are not Americans, are having their visas stripped, and they're told to go back home. Those classes from your shithole. So Harvard and MIT have sued the Trump administration in federal court trying to block this directive. They argue that the policy was politically motivated, would throw higher education into chaos. The university said the new directive would prevent many of Harvard's 5,000 international students and hundreds of thousands of students at other universities across the country from staying in the United States. And that, of course, is the real motive of the xenophobic president and his equally hateful Stephen Miller, who is the main advisor on immigration issues. Trump has also falsely tweeted that schools are open with no problem in European nations like Germany, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. But there have been problems, for example, in Sweden, which never closed its schools and placed many restrictions on the rest of society, or placed. They kind of just let it fly. Sweden has seen the death of a teacher at one school, at least 2 staff members at other schools. And Trump is once again threatening to withhold federal dollars. And the Republicans who wrote the CARES Act, the big bailout bill, they made sure that there are few restrictions on Education Secretary Betsy DeVos and how to parcel out $13 billion in stimulus funding. And she's going to find religious schools claiming they're just private schools, with a Bible or a Torah on the scene. And in Texas, things have gotten confusing, where the regulation related to wearing masks, the language, is confusing and creates a big loophole that some sheriffs in some counties are taking advantage of. So in 9 Texas counties that qualify, they have more than 20 cases of COVID. They are supposed to require face masks for people in public. But the order was written that you can't be detaining people for not wearing a mask. So the, I guess, highly liberal interpretation of that, in order to promote conservative talking points, comes from the sheriff of Denton County, Tracy Murphy. And Tracy says, I guess Tracy is a woman, but I don't know. The governor's order does not direct me, but gives me permission. I'm complying by not enforcing it. If I can't detain anyone for this, I can't write them a ticket. I can't even stop and talk to them. Now, it's absurd. They know it, and they love it just for that. Also, the top Republican dogs, Dan Patrick, Lieutenant Governor, and Greg Abbott, the governor, they are going to be not showing up at the Republican State Convention this weekend. Don't do as I say, and don't do as I do. After a 50-fold increase in COVID infections in Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu's approval rate has dropped from 73% 2 weeks ago to 46%. He's even found a little humble crow or humble pie. To my regret, for a number of weeks, the handling of the lost direction. Despite systemic and regular warnings in various systems and in discussions in different forums, we watch with frustration as the hourglass of opportunities runs low. All right. That's an apology of sorts. What are you going to do about it, Bibi? I don't know about you, but I'm not eager to get on an airliner anytime soon. And the latest report shows that American Airlines is not only filling its planes, filling the center seats, but also some very aggressive, authoritarian flight attendants required a passenger who was on a flight from Dallas to Newark back her assigned seat. Her name is Joy Gonzalez. She's an aviation engineer. And her assigned seat was a window seat with 2 older passengers beside her in the middle and aisle seats. She noticed that after the door of the cabin had closed, that there was an empty row right behind her. So she moved to that seat, which is an exit row, and under the class-based pricing of airline seats today, you pay extra for an aisle seat. It gives you extra leg room and, So the flight attendant said, you have 2 choices. Get back in your original seat, or we're going to return the whole plane to the gate where you can pay extra for the exit row. Now, this is such bullshit. Because flight attendants do not have to enforce the collection of extra money because somebody puts their butt in a seat that on the internet seating plan is in orange or, requires a premium payment. They have that flexibility. And if you'd like to know, at least through September 30th, Southwest Airlines is blocking middle seats. Delta Airlines has reduced capacity to 60% in the main cabin by blocking middle seats through September 30th, and JetBlue is blocking middle seats through July 31st. And just to give you a gauge on air travel, ordinarily during the July 4th holiday, about 2 million people go through airports. Well, that's an average, not just for July 4th, but that is the daily average. And on July 2nd, that number was under 800,000. And speaking of airlines, United said that it's going to furlough as many as 36,000 workers, 40% of its staff, starting on October 1st, if travel remains weak and if too few employees accept buyout or early retirement packages. Didn't we give him $50 billion to not lay people off? Yes, we did. Well, as I've articulated before, when I look at the successful management of the pandemic by Governor Cuomo in New York and Governor Newsom here in California, my exceptions are for nursing homes and prisons. In New York State, more than 6,400 residents have died in nursing homes. And back in late March, Governor Cuomo issued a directive that sent coronavirus patients from hospitals to nursing homes. Many felt they were compelled to do so. They couldn't afford to lose the revenue. And so there are questions about Cuomo's decision and whether it in fact enhanced the spread of the virus by bringing it to nursing homes, infecting patients, and staff members who, of course, come in and out of those facilities and go home every day. So the Cuomo administration, they're hopping mad. They issued a 33-page report blaming the 37,500 nursing home workers who have become infected since March. They are the problem, not the fact that they were forced to work with infected patients. Well, I'm not too persuaded by that, Andy. No, I don't. And by the way, in New York, the state health department only counts residents who physically died within a nursing home in their tally, and not those who contracted the virus and went on to die in a hospital or other facility. California does, for example, nursing home patients who were transferred to hospitals and died. But that points up the inaccuracy and the instability of much of the data that we are fed by the media related to the spread of the virus, its impact, the meaning of positive testing. Now, prisons are the other big hotspot. And while New York State has remarkably fewer prison inmates than California, we still have over 100,000 here. And the population in New York State, let me find the figure here in this article, is far less. Despite that, only 38,000 prisoners in the state of New York. Now, I know California's population is bigger, but still, that is a remarkable differential. Over 40% of those in prison who've been tested in New York State are positive with COVID-19, and they have only released 1,250 prisoners early in order to reduce their risk and the risk to the remaining population. So there are efforts now by political leaders to deal with this, and Cuomo quietly set up a nursing home for prisoners at the Adirondack Correctional Facility in the mountains of North Country of New York State. It used to be mostly a lockup for incarcerated teens aged 16 to 17, but it has been converted to a prisoner nursing home, and 96 elderly male prisoners have been transferred to the Adirondack prison. But family members feel that, number one, isolating them in this manner makes it impossible for families to stay in touch. A letter signed by over 80 social and racial justice organizations sent to Cuomo said this plan runs directly counter to public health, racial justice, and criminal justice evidence, and instead promotes mass incarceration, family separation, racism, and the needless punishment of incarcerated older people. And you won't be surprised to know that those who are assigned to this prison nursing home are mostly men, over half black, and predominantly people of color. The hot spot behind bars, just a half mile from me here in California, San Quentin State Prison, continues to be a real serious problem. The impact on local hospitals, like here in Marin County, where there are now a dozen San Quentin inmates being hospitalized. Many have been sent to San Francisco, to the East Bay, Alameda County area. And there is concern that ICU beds are being taken up that are not available to members of the general population. But this whole matter has been so badly bungled. And I'm very critical of Governor Gavin Newsom for this, because this was not secret. And we now know that the transfer of 121 men from the Chino prison in Southern California to San Quentin brought the virus in. And with now 7 men from death row dead and not by execution, we have to ask how, once those Chino inmates arrived, how was it able to spread to the segregated death row East Block? And death row prisoners are generally isolated. They get their own exercise yard, a little concrete pit, for an hour a day. They may see a fellow prisoner on the way to the shower or to dinner. But it is surprising that the fatalities have come primarily from death row. There's 722 men on death row. Total population is around 3,000. More than half of the population is tested positive. Large numbers of staff members. And, of course, those staff members come in and out of the prison every day, and I may be behind them in the grocery store when I do some shopping on the way home tonight. Major, major blunders here in California. Well, you know that Congress shoveled out billions and billions of bailout money, trillions for the banks and Wall Street. And we're getting more information that shows why Steve Mnuchin and the Trump administration were refusing to give us disclosures on who got the money and how much. And they're still being fuzzy about the how much part. But Grover Norquist and his Americans for Tax Reform Foundation, the people who just abhor government handouts, social programs, this is the guy who wanted to shrink government till he could drown it in his bathtub. Well, they took between $150,000 and $350,000 from the Paycheck Protection Program. So did the Ayn Rand Institute and Citizens Against Government Waste. So their hypocrisy, the situational ethics, and the real hollow nature of their political stands is now visible to everyone. The defense coming from the communications director, Alexandra Abrams at Citizens Against Government Waste. In our 36-year history, we've never sought or accepted taxpayer money. But the unprecedented closing down of the U.S. economy to fight against the spread of COVID-19 had a significant impact on our funding sources and threatened our ability to provide continued employment to our staff. You mean you didn't have any money in the bank? You didn't plan ahead? That's how you lecture other people who apply for government aid. Now, to be fair, It wasn't just people connected to the Republican administration who got money out of this fund. Nancy Pelosi's investor husband, Paul, is a minority stakeholder in 2 hotels. They're upscale hotels that applied for and received the money. And Dick Blum, the investor husband of one Senator Dianne Feinstein. At least one entity in which he is a major investor took money from the PPP. I want to recommend Gareth Porter's total dismantling of the New York Times promoted narrative of the Russian bounty payments to the Taliban to kill Americans in Afghanistan. He does a great job at the Gray Zone today. I've linked to it in the show file for the podcast. And it shows that the claim from anonymous sources that American intelligence offered information to Trump about this in the presidential daily brief, well, it shows that the information didn't even come from U.S. intelligence sources. It came from less intelligent sources in Afghanistan. And Gareth Porter, who is a great historian and journalist, he opines that torture was used to extract these confessions from detainees, and that the $500,000 in U.S. cash being held by a guy who did drug dealing and other activities may not have come from Russia at all. And I noted that on July 4th, in the print edition of the New York Times, they are softening the narrative by blaming the Trump administration for focusing on the gaps in this intelligence, not what they consider to be the core. And I'm really sorry to see the yellow journalism like this coming from the once great New York Times. Remember Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman? He and his twin brother both on the National Security Council at the White House. And Alex Vindman testified to the House inquiry, the Intelligence Committee inquiry into the Ukraine story. And Vindman was one of the stand-up people who honored his oath to the Constitution, unlike over 50 Republican senators. And he just told what he knew. And while I'm a skeptic of Russiagate and Russia Bountygate, I'm not a skeptic of Ukrainegate. And Vindman deserves respect for what he did. Instead, he's been bullied by Trump. He has figured out that he will be denied promotion, and that a whole group of other Army officers who are ready for promotion are being held back because of Vindman's case. And the dirty dealing where the Trump White House has decided that they need dirt on Vindman to discredit him in order to rationalize the denial of promotion. It's really sick to see so many people apply the vindictive hand of Donald Trump in so many ways. And finally today, Tom Friedman, who I have just this much respect for, on his opinion page at the New York Times today, he advises Joe Biden to attach conditions to any debate offer from Donald Trump. He says Biden should declare that he'll take part in a debate only if Trump releases his tax returns for 2016 through 2018, like Biden has, and that Trump must agree to real-time fact-checking, that 10 minutes before the scheduled conclusion of the debate, that team will report on any misleading statements, phony numbers, or outright lies either candidate has uttered. Well, I don't disagree with either of these ideas, but Trump will never go along with them. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it all over the place. You'll find it on YouTube. I'm still Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.